Okay, so Mike, I've had a observation, and I don't know if enough people are talking about kind of the link between mass immigration and DEI numbers. And my feeling is that we're setting up immigrants to fail, and it's being used as justification of further inequities and the need for more DEI programs. Do you want to, just for anybody who's not up to speed, do you want to define DEI and kind of where these initiatives are being implemented in and how they work? So
So DEI is, as most people know it and use that acronym in that order: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Most, I suppose, governments, at least, okay, well, let's limit it to our stupid government, defines it as, generally diversity is going to refer to a diversity of the most obvious physical traits of somebody. Equity being usually referring to I think probably most people refer to in a gender-based, a sex-based aspect. You know, if it's equitable hiring practices, for example, between men and women. Inclusivity, God, that can mean anything, can't it? And I think that's kind of the point. We've seen these sort of initiatives kind of infiltrate everywhere from, started in the universities and sort of expanded outwards into, every government program, essentially every corporate HR structure, every banking institution, every even you see it in you see even sports teams trying to implement these things into their their head offices and stuff. You can't really, you're not going to really have much luck in an NHL team to have equitable player sex distributions in your team. So I guess you can maybe apply it in your back end. But
so is that equality of outcome, or is that equality of opportunity?
Yeah, so there's the problem right there. So people don't understand what the difference between the two is. If you're providing equal opportunity to somebody, you have two people. They're trying to apply for a position. They put forward their credentials, and you choose the best candidate based on their, some combination of experience or credentials of some type, or whatever factor is important for the position that you're hiring. Whereas with a DEI based framework, you're coming at it from the back end, where you're saying, well, we know that we want to have this sort of distribution in our employ of black employees versus white employees versus Asian employees. We know we need, this amount of employees who identify as LGBTQ+, and then so you hire based on those metrics rather than any sort of natural distribution arising organically. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and if there is an unequal distribution of whatever they define that as, that's used as proof of discrimination.
Yeah. Rather than it being just some natural occurrence of hey, you know what? We live in a 70% majority white country, so yeah, it probably would make sense if around 70% of your university admissions, for example, are white. That would make sense, and that's not actually that doesn't actually mean you're discriminating against whatever group you want, because it's not an even spread. It actually makes less sense for it to be an even spread, because all that would mean in a country that has a demographic distribution of a certain percentage, if you see anything that deviates from that with any sort of significance, then you can identify that as probably a manipulated number.
Yeah, and one thing, when you're looking at the percentages in a workplace, that there's always going to be a lag time. So let's say you have a population change in a country. The skill sets of a new population, when there is immigration, well, there's going to be a certain amount that have some skills. There's going to be some that are educated, some that are less educated. There's going to be some who speak English, who resonate with the culture. There's going to be some that don't speak English very well. They're just learning. They don't resonate with the culture. Maybe they feel siloed, or they feel most comfortable in kind of their own cultural pockets, and they're not really adapting to Canadian life as we know it. And when you look at this new mix of low skill and these are just barriers for them succeeding and doing as well as a population that's been established in Canada. So if you have multiple generations of living in Canada, you have the network effects of family, you have friends, you resonate with the culture, you have the language, you're going to succeed just based on all the advantages that come with a dominant culture. I wouldn't expect anybody to go to Japan and succeed if they keep on breaking all these taboos that they don't even know they're breaking. Like, that's not going to get you very far. Like, if you're stumbling through the language and you're breaking taboos, you're not going to go very far.
Actually, that's a really interesting point, because I was listening to a Peter Boghossian podcast recently, and I can't remember the name of the guest, but we'll link it below. And he was talking about the U.S., but the same applies for Canada. There used to be sort of a responsibility placed on an immigrant to the U.S. or to Canada to sort of, Canada has the cultural mosaic, whereas the U.S. had the melting pot. But still, there was a, sort of an assumption that you would, kind of live like the locals do. You'd kind of leave some of that. You don't need to live exactly as how you lived in the place that you came from. You can go to the Timmy's and hang out, and sure, you never had a coffee and donut shop where you came from, but this is something that Canadians do, so we can all do this together. Just that kind of nice flowery shit, right? But he was saying, he's like, we've let it erode to such a point where we've considered that even putting this sort of pressure at all onto new immigrants is racist, or is somehow culturally insensitive. That what is the culture that we're left with? What is the culture to assimilate into? And so, I mean, you have a situation where I don't know how exactly if this phrase applies, but you say the saying is cut off your nose to spite your face. You've got a situation where you've been so, say, lenient, or so wanting to be careful about not being offensive or not being insensitive in any way to an immigrant population, that you put zero pressure on them to acclimate into this new society. How are you going to do it now? How do you then all of a sudden say, well, now we're going to be Canadian? Okay, well, what does that mean right now?
Yeah, if you don't put any pressure, cultures will be lost. And in the case of, just take Japan as an example,
Great
right now
example.
they're very strict, and they're very homogenous, and they have pretty strict, if somebody outside who's not born in Japan is calling themselves Japanese, there's a certain level they need to really resonate with the culture and speak the language, and the threshold for being called Japanese is much higher, because they've got such a rich and kind of preserved culture. And so the cultural side is one thing, but it's just, when you look at what does it take to succeed in a new place, I think, first of all, there's a limit to how many people can come at once. Mm-hmm. There's a certain amount of integration that is necessary in any workplace, in the way that, you just, when you're looking to set up your life and interact with a society, there's certain things you need to know. You need to know enough customs, enough rules, and enough of the language for it to just work at a base level. Mm-hmm. And I think the faster you immigrate, the more you have, you're going to reach a point where you're going to have less and less people integrating well and less people succeeding. Mm-hmm. And what that's going to turn into is more and more people in extreme poverty because either there's not enough low-skill jobs for them, they're all competing for the same jobs, not enough housing for them, and they're not doing well. So if you run the numbers, and we're taking the step back to, let's look at equity numbers. We're looking at different racial groups, and we're saying, well, one group's doing better than another. Well, of course, people who've lived in Canada for multiple decades are going to look like they're doing exceptionally better than this growing population of marginalized people. But are they marginalized because of racism, or are we setting them up for failure through a broken immigration system?
Yeah, well, that and you also have to watch out for selectively manipulated statistics when you look at when you read these sort of reports, because one thing that we know, again, this is something I think it's more in the US, but I think probably the same or at least similar applies in Canada. Usually when people are talking about, a group's not doing as well in relation to another, at least in North America, you're talking about in relation to white people. So white people are used as the benchmark to which all other races are compared. But what a lot of people don't, even factor in is that white people aren't doing the best in the US, probably not in Canada. Asians are. Chinese people are. Japanese, and I think they call it cold climate Asian. So like the Chinese, Korean, Japanese, they all in almost every metric score higher in education level, income level.
You can see this going into universities and the results after when they're in workplaces and jobs and
yeah. So, but it would be ridiculous to see a corporate DEI program biasing itself so that it doesn't admit more Asian people in relation to white people. They would still probably potentially be considered discriminated against class, maybe, if not a minority class at least. So yeah, that's and Indians aren't far behind in many categories. Now we've sort of kind of to your earlier point probably about there being a limit. We've probably overshot that. Specifically with India, because immigration from India over the last, I think, probably 18 months at least, 24 months maybe, has been wild. So high. So with that, you obviously import a certain amount of people who are going to skew those statistics downwards, whereas maybe the Indian families who have been in Canada for maybe 1, 2, or 3 generations by this point have also generally exceeded the native white population too. So, I mean, I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, it depends on is an immigration system optimized for, well, are we growing Canada and we want Canada to thrive? So is it attracting high skilled and people who want to really resonate with what Canada is here, or are we bringing in people who are just coming to Canada because either you get free stuff, free healthcare, or it's a improvement from where they came from?
Yeah. Well, it's almost certainly that. It's almost certainly the last point, which is part of what creates some of these problems with respect to that we're seeing nowadays with employment, because we have I often hear the argument nowadays of from people saying like, well, we need this sort of immigration to keep our workforce intact, because it's sort of one of those, like, we've been expanding so much with population. We need to keep expanding the population in order to support the population that we've expanded to. So one of the arguments there is that, well, who else is going to work these jobs? Who else is going to work at the, at the convenience stores and the Tim Hortons and all that stuff? And it's like, well, first of all, that's, extremely, well, I mean, I would be offended if I were an immigrant and I was essentially heard in a backhanded way that the only thing I'm good for is serving coffee to native Canadians, But also, on the other side, you run into the problem where that argument is super convincing to somebody who owns a bunch of Tim Hortons franchises, maybe, because they know that they'll have a steady stream of people being imported into the country that no matter what you pay them, it'll be an automatic upgrade over whatever poverty or slave wages they were earning from where they came. So you have a downward pressure on wages, which affects the rest of the economy that stacks up on top of that. But also then you create a system where it's only these immigrants who are filling these job positions because it's actually the corporatocracy in a way that is taking advantage of these people.
Yeah, you see these kind of biases in subtle ways, and one of them was during the pandemic when we said, well, we have to shut things down. Oh, but to keep these essential jobs, these dangerous jobs going, we have to import people. Like we have to have these temporary foreign workers to work these there, to put them in harm's way when everything else was locked down. That was from the perspective of those who thought it was too dangerous to let Canadians work. But don't worry, we'll get foreign temporary workers to like
we'll get some immigrants to DoorDash our food to us. Yeah, like what a like just a gross way of thinking about it. Jay Bhattacharya has called that the laptop class. So people who are lucky enough to have jobs that are primarily, you're a corporate employee or some sort of, you're a salesperson or something who can do a lot of your job from a computer. We'll just have the poor immigrants shuttle us our food so that we can stay safe. Like, yeah, it's gross, man.
Yeah, there is one more thing to kind of think about is Canada's role on the international stage. And if we look at what Canada's GDP is, and you look at the number of people in the world, so either is it our job in Canada to save everybody? Let it be letting in people, because we couldn't. Let's say we let in 40 million people. Sure,
don't give them any ideas, James.
Would we be saving exactly? Would we be saving all those 40 million people, or would it just reduce Canada's ability to be productive, and or would it kind of throw everything into chaos of what we have here right now? Same thing with, does just sending money to places in the current form that we have, in things that aren't really creating self-reliance. So let's say you hand out money to a random country and they're like, okay, great, we just got this money, and they just buy something and they haven't actually upgraded either infrastructure or they haven't improved their
every
ability.
African country then is what you're saying. Every African country from the 80s to the early 2000s that we gave money to.
Yeah. So if their ability to expand their own productivity hasn't increased, then we haven't done anything of net benefit. We've just maybe temporarily delayed a little bit of suffering in a way.
Well, which is so emblematic of the DEI initiative as in practice, because it
feels good.
It feels good. It exists solely to make the people who are writing the initiatives feel good about themselves and make themselves feel really enlightened and really progressive. Where in reality, if you're accomplishing anything, it's in the negative. It's going backwards.
Yeah. So it's these things feel good, but in reality, they don't really have the impact. And they don't really have an impact in reality. And then when you look at the numbers behind it, I feel like these things, it just gets very muddy, and it can be used to push. Somebody can use these numbers in any politically convenient way that they choose.
Yeah.
And I feel like DEI and immigration is exactly that. And it's going to be used as proof that DEI needs to be implemented more and stronger. And again, that's going to just involve, well, we need more top-down intervention, or we need more funding, or we need to redistribute more wealth, or we need to restrict certain amount of certain amount of spots in every job, or
and then when the native or the natural born population starts to have more of a vocal opposition to this, well, wouldn't you know it, that too is more evidence that we need stronger DEI initiatives to combat racism.
Yeah, all those racists speaking up again. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's a circular kind of grifting economy in a way.
No doubt.
So hopefully you guys found this informative. I'm curious in the comments.
Or at the very least, depressing.
Yeah, depressing. Well, especially right now, a lot of talk about immigration, a lot of pressure put on Justin Trudeau to address it, which has been under his watch. So we'll see how that unfolds.
Yeah. Well, we got what, 11 more months of this. So
yeah, we might have to do some follow-ups and see what happens there.
Cool.
Cheers.
Thanks for the chat, James.
Yep. Till the next one.